The stadium lights flickered once, twice, then the first explosion tore through the night air. Smoke curled above thousands of screaming fans as chairs flew and barricades collapsed like paper. Somewhere in that chaos, a woman with a camera slung around her neck lost her footing, lost her breath, lost every plan she had for the evening. She saw one man standing still in the middle of the madness, untouched, unmoved, like the riot itself was afraid of him. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his fortune. She didn't know that grabbing his arm would change the direction of both their lives forever. All she knew was that if she didn't hold on to something in that moment, she was going to disappear into the crowd and never be found again. If you're already feeling your heart race, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't forget. The night had started so beautifully. Lagos-born, London-raised Chidinma Eze had waited 3 years to shoot a World Cup for her own portfolio. No agency breathing down her neck. No editor cropping her vision into something smaller than what she saw through the lens. She'd quit her marketing job 8 months earlier, cashed out what little savings she had, and told herself that if this trip didn't work, she'd go back to a desk and let the dream die quietly. She was crouched near the stadium's east entrance, camera raised, capturing a group of children painted in their country's colors, laughing as they waved flags twice their size. That photo alone, she thought, could be the cover of her first travel book. She had no idea, in that instant, that a man in a dark coat was watching her from a distance, watching the way she smiled at strangers like she'd known them her whole life. She never saw his face that day. She only remembered, months later, that someone had been standing there. Tonight, though, there was no time for memory. The match had just ended in a controversial call, and within minutes what had been celebration curdled into fury. A firecracker sounded too much like a gunshot. Someone screamed bomb, and the word spread faster than truth ever could. The crowd became a single frightened animal, trampling itself to escape a threat nobody could confirm. Chidinma's camera strap cut into her neck as she was shoved sideways. She stumbled over a fallen barricade, scraped her palm against concrete, and when she looked up, smoke was rolling toward her like a living thing. She could not find the exit. She could not find air. Every direction looked the same, chaos in every color. That was when she saw him. He walked like the riot wasn't happening around him, like the screaming and the shoving belonged to a different world than the one he occupied. Tall, dressed too well for a night like this, his expression carved from something colder than fear. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. Survival doesn't ask permission. She threw herself against him, arms locking around his waist, face pressed into his chest, like he was the only solid thing left standing. "Baby, please don't leave me," she gasped, the lie tumbling out of her before she even understood she'd said it. For one long second, he didn't move. She felt his heartbeat under her palm, steady, unbothered, like a man who had faced far worse than a stampede. Then his arm came around her waist, firm, deliberate, pulling her fully into his side, as if she'd always belonged there. Around them, something strange happened. Men who looked like they could break bones for a living lowered their eyes and stepped back, clearing space like the sea parting. Chidinma didn't understand it. She was too busy shaking, too busy trying to remember how to breathe. "You're safe," the man said, low, close to her ear, in accented but flawless English. "Don't look back, just walk." She didn't ask questions. Not yet. She let him guide her through a gap that seemed to open only for him, past overturned barricades and fleeing fans, until they reached a line of black vehicles idling behind a fence that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. A door opened. He guided her inside like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Who are you?" she finally managed, once the door shut and the screaming outside became a muffled roar. He studied her for a long moment, like he was deciding how much truth she could hold. "Kang Sung-min," he said simply, as if the name alone should mean nothing to her. It meant nothing to her then. It would mean everything soon. The car pulled away, the chaos shrinking behind tinted windows, and Chidinma realized her hand was still fisted in the fabric of his coat. She let go slowly, embarrassed, murmuring an apology. "Don't apologize," he said, eyes forward, jaw tight like he was still listening for danger. "You did the right thing." "I grabbed a stranger and called him baby," she said, half laughing, half crying from the adrenaline. "I don't think there's a right way to do that." For the briefest second, something almost like amusement flickered across his face. It vanished as quickly as it came. "You're safe now. That's what matters." She studied him in the dim light, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his hands rested with unnatural stillness on his knees, like a man trained to never fidget, never reveal. Whoever he was not just wealthy. He was watched, protected, feared, maybe. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safer than the street," he said. "You'll be taken care of tonight." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand her own hotel, her own space, but exhaustion and fear had drained whatever fight she had left. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, and for the first time since the explosion, she let herself breathe. She didn't notice him glance at her. She didn't notice the way his expression softened, just slightly, like a man looking at something he'd been waiting a long time to see up close. The convoy didn't take her to a hotel. It took her to what looked like an entire building carved out of glass and silence, tucked behind gates that required 3 separate checkpoints before the car was even allowed to slow down. Men in dark suits spoke into earpieces, eyes scanning every direction, and Chidinma began to understand, slowly, uneasily, that this was not the world of an ordinary rich man. "This is a hotel?" she asked, stepping out onto marble that gleamed under lights so soft they seemed designed to make people feel important. "It's mine," Sung-min said simply. She blinked. "The hotel?" "The company that owns it," he corrected, though the distinction did little to calm her nerves. A woman in a sharp gray suit approached, bowing slightly before speaking rapid Korean to him. He answered without looking away from Chidinma, like his attention was a rope he refused to let slacken. "This is Tae-ri," he said. "She'll get you anything you need tonight. Clothes, food, whatever helps you feel normal again." "I don't need charity," Chidinma said, some of her spine returning now that the immediate danger had passed. "I need my hotel room, my things, my camera bag, if it survived that mess." "Your camera bag is being retrieved," he said. "As for your hotel, I'd advise against returning there tonight." "Why?" He hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. "Because right now, half the city doesn't know if that riot is over." It wasn't the full truth. She would learn that later. But that night, exhausted and still trembling from adrenaline, she accepted a guest suite with a bed too soft and a window overlooking a city that had nearly swallowed her whole. She didn't sleep much. She kept replaying the moment she'd grabbed him, the way his arm had wrapped around her like muscle memory, like he'd done it before, like her body fit against his in some way that felt less like accident and more like recognition. She told herself it was nothing. Adrenaline made people imagine things. By morning, she would learn just how wrong that assumption was. If this story already has you hooked, make sure you're subscribed, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from, because things are about to get a lot more complicated for both of them. Morning arrived with sunlight slicing through unfamiliar curtains, and Chidinma's phone buzzing itself off the nightstand. She reached for it groggily, expecting messages from worried friends checking on Riot coverage. Instead, her screen was flooded with notifications so numerous her phone could barely keep up. She opened the first article with dread pooling in her stomach. Korean billionaire reveals secret girlfriend during World Cup chaos. Her photo was there, unmistakable, arms locked around Sung-min's waist, face pressed to his chest, captured by someone's phone in the middle of the riot. The image had been shared, dissected, captioned in a dozen languages within hours. "Oh my God," she whispered, sitting up so fast the blanket slid off her shoulders. "Oh my God. Oh my God." She scrolled further, her name nowhere in the articles yet, just endless speculation. Who is she? Mystery woman, photographed with reclusive security mogul. Fans demand answers. Security mogul. The words sat wrong in her mouth. She'd assumed hotel owner, maybe entertainment executive. She hadn't imagined this. A knock sounded at her door before she could form a single coherent thought. Tae stood there, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Kang would like to speak with you," she said. "Whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now," Chidinma said, throat tight. "Because apparently the entire internet thinks I'm dating a man I met 12 hours ago." She was led down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her yearly rent, into an office where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like a kingdom laid out for inspection. Sung-min stood near the glass, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped Korean. When he noticed her, he ended the call without ceremony. "You've seen the news," he said. "Not a question. I've seen my face plastered across headlines calling me your secret girlfriend," she said, arms crossed. "So yes, I've seen the news." "I apologize for the intrusion into your privacy," he said, and to his credit, he sounded like he meant it. "This wasn't planned." "Then fix it," she said. "Tell them it's not true. Tell them I'm nobody, a photographer who got caught in a stampede." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, and refuse to at the same time. "I need you to understand something about who I am," he said finally. "My family owns Hangard International. We provide private security to governments, corporations, high-profile individuals across 3 continents. My face isn't supposed to appear in tabloids. My life isn't supposed to be interesting enough for headlines." "Then why is it?" she asked. "Because for years people have speculated about who I might marry, what alliances my family might make, what weaknesses I might have," he said. "A man with no visible attachments is a man with nothing to protect, nothing to leverage. I don't understand what that has to do with me." He walked closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. "Last night, you gave me something I haven't had in years. The appearance of something human, something soft in a world that only respects power. So I was a shield," she said flatly. "You were an accident," he corrected. "But an accident I don't intend to correct just yet." Her stomach dropped. What does that mean? He didn't answer immediately, and later, she would remember that hesitation as the moment everything shifted. He offered her a proposition instead, laid out with the calm precision of a man used to negotiating deals worth more than most people's lifetimes. 1 month. Pretend to be his partner publicly. Photographs, appearances, nothing more complicated than that. In exchange, he would personally fund her travel photography company, the one she'd been dreaming about since she quit her job, the one she'd nearly convinced herself would never happen. "You're offering to buy me," she said, disbelief coloring her voice. "I'm offering you an opportunity," he said, nothing more. "I don't need a man's money to build my dream," she snapped, gathering the shreds of her dignity around her like armor. "I left a perfectly good job to build something real. I'm not going to hand you my integrity because you can write a check." She turned and walked out before he could respond, ignoring Taeree's startled expression, ignoring the security detail that hovered uncertainly near the elevator, unsure whether to stop the woman their employer clearly wanted kept close. She made it back to her own hotel by afternoon, camera bag recovered and miraculously intact, and told herself the whole strange chapter was closed. She was wrong. That night, exhausted from the day's whiplash of emotions, she fell asleep with her camera charging on the nightstand and her door locked twice for good measure. She woke sometime past midnight to the quiet click of a latch, the softest disturbance of air that told her something was wrong before her mind fully caught up. She sat up sharply, heart hammering, and found her hotel room in disarray, drawers pulled open, her suitcase overturned, but nothing obviously missing. Her jewelry sat untouched on the dresser. Her cash was still in her wallet. It was only when she reached for her camera bag that she understood. Every memory card was gone. Every photograph from the Riot, the ones she'd risked her life to capture, vanished without a trace. She called hotel security first, then, with trembling hands, dialed the number Taeree had given her the night before, some instinct telling her this wasn't a random burglary. Sung-min arrived within 20 minutes, expression unreadable, but eyes sharp with something she hadn't seen before. Real concern, edged with anger. "Tell me exactly what's missing," he said. "Just the memory cards from that night," she said, arms wrapped around herself. "Everything else, they left." He was quiet for a long moment, processing something she couldn't follow. "Do you still have your camera itself?" "Yes." "Show me." She handed it over, confused, watching as he checked the camera's internal storage with practiced efficiency, the kind of skill that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd searched for hidden evidence. His expression changed when he found it. One image, saved to the camera's buffer memory by accident, before she'd transferred it to a card, an image she hadn't even noticed capturing in the chaos. A wide shot of the crowd, meant to document the scale of the riot, but in the corner, barely visible, a figure on a rooftop, holding what was unmistakably a rifle. "Oh my God," Chidinma whispered, staring at the screen. "You didn't know this was here," Sungmin said, not quite a question. "I had no idea," she said. "I was just documenting the crowd. I never even looked at this shot closely." He was silent for a long time, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the image, like it confirmed something he'd feared, but hoped to disprove. "What is it?" she asked. "Sungmin, what does this mean?" He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw real fear in his expression, not for himself, she realized slowly, but for her. "It means," he said quietly, "that whoever wanted this photograph destroyed knows you have proof of something they can't afford the world to see. If your heart is racing right now, this is the perfect moment to smash that like button and let me know where you're watching from, because the danger in this story is only just beginning." He moved her that same night, no explanation beyond the word necessary, back to the fortress-like compound she'd sworn she'd never return to. This time, she didn't argue. The image of that rifle sat burned into her mind, the realization that someone out there wanted whatever she'd accidentally captured badly enough to break into her room and search through her things while she slept. "Tell me the truth," she said, once they were alone in his office again, the city lights glittering coldly beyond the windows. All of it. No more half answers. He studied her for a long moment, like he was weighing how much truth she could carry, and then, for the first time, he told her. "My family's company doesn't just protect buildings and executives," he said. "We provide security details for high-ranking government officials, foreign dignitaries, people whose deaths could destabilize entire regions. That kind of work makes enemies. Enemies with long memories and longer patience." "And the riot," she said slowly, pieces clicking together. "It wasn't random." "No," he said. "It was cover. Chaos big enough to hide a single precise shot." "Aimed at who?" He held her gaze steadily. "Me." The word landed heavy in the room. "The sniper was aiming for you," she repeated. "That night, when I grabbed you." "Yes." "Sungmin, She stopped, throat tight, the memory of that moment rearranging itself entirely in her mind. She hadn't just stumbled into a stranger for safety, she'd stepped, unknowingly, directly into the path of a bullet meant for him. "You saved my life," he said quietly, like the words cost him something to admit. "When you grabbed me, you shifted my position just enough. The shot missed. If you hadn't moved when you did, I wouldn't be standing here." She sat down slowly, legs unsteady beneath her. "I didn't know. I was just trying to survive." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it remarkable." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the truth settling between them like something physical. Chidinma had come to this country to build a career, to prove to herself that leaving stability for uncertainty hadn't been a mistake. She hadn't expected to become a target, hadn't expected to accidentally save a man's life while trying to save her own. "So what happens now?" she finally asked. "Now," he said, "we disappear for a while, until I find out who did this and why." They left the city before dawn, no convoy this time, no obvious security, just a single car and two people trying to become invisible. Sungmin drove himself, something Chidinma suspected he rarely did, navigating winding roads toward the coast where a modest house waited, Unremarkable, unregistered, the kind of place built for exactly this purpose. The next few days blurred into something Chidinma hadn't expected. Fear slowly gave way to routine, and routine gave way to something dangerously close to comfort. They cooked together in a kitchen too small for two people trying to avoid touching each other, elbows bumping over cutting boards, laughter slipping out unguarded when Sung-min burned rice for the third time in a row. "I thought billionaires had people for this," she teased one evening, taking the spoon from his hand before he could ruin dinner completely. "Billionaires still have to eat," he said, watching her stir the pot with more skill than he'd managed all week. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother," she said, something softening in her voice. "She used to say a woman who can feed herself never has to depend on anyone. Smart woman." "The smartest," she said, smiling at the memory. "She'd have had opinions about you, though." "Bad ones, I assume." "She didn't trust quiet men," Chidinma said, glancing at him sideways. "Said they always had something to hide." Something flickered across his face, there and gone too fast for her to read clearly. She wasn't wrong. Later that night, sitting on the small porch overlooking dark water, Chidinma found herself talking more than she had in years, about her father's disappointment when she quit her job, about the fear that kept her awake some nights that she'd thrown away stability for a dream too big for her hands. "You don't strike me as someone who's afraid of much," Sung-min said, watching her with an attention that made her feel, for the first time in a long time, truly seen. "I'm afraid of everything," she admitted. "I just don't let it stop me." "That's not the absence of fear," he said quietly. "That's courage." "What are you afraid of?" she asked, turning the question back on him. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Becoming exactly what my family expects me to be. Cold. Untouchable. Someone incapable of caring about anything that can't be protected by contracts and security details." "You don't seem cold to me," she said softly. "I didn't. Until you," he said, and something in his voice made her chest ache in a way she wasn't prepared for. A few days later, the isolation began to feel less like hiding and more like living. They fell into rhythms neither of them mentioned out loud: morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, evening walks along the shoreline, conversations that stretched past midnight about everything and nothing. Chidinma caught herself laughing more than she had in months, real laughter, unguarded, the kind she'd almost forgotten she was capable of. Sung-min, she noticed, smiled more too. Small things at first, the corner of his mouth twitching when she teased him, then wider, freer, like a muscle he was slowly remembering how to use. One evening, storm clouds rolling in from the coast, they stood together on the porch watching lightning split the sky. She was shivering slightly, more from adrenaline than cold, and he draped his jacket over her shoulders without being asked, the gesture so natural it made her chest tighten. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. "For the jacket?" "For all of it," she said. "For pulling me out of that crowd. For not treating me like a burden, even when I clearly am one." "You're not a burden," he said, voice low, closer than she'd realized. "You're the first thing that's felt real to me in years." The space between them disappeared slowly, deliberately, like neither of them wanted to rush what was about to happen. His hand came up to cradle her jaw, thumb brushing along her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted every cold, calculated thing she'd assumed about him. "Chidinma," he murmured, her name sounding different in his voice, softer somehow. "Yes," she breathed. He leaned down, and for one suspended heartbeat, she thought he would kiss her, thought this impossible, terrifying, beautiful thing between them would finally have a name. Then he pulled back sharply, like he'd touched fire. "You need to leave," he said, voice suddenly hard, distant, a wall slamming shut behind his eyes. "What?" She blinked, confusion and hurt crashing into her at once. "Sung-min, what are you talking about?" "Tomorrow," he said, stepping back further, putting distance between them like she was suddenly dangerous. "I'll have you taken somewhere safe, somewhere far from this." "You're pushing me away," she said, voice trembling now, anger rising to cover the hurt. After everything, you're just going to... It's not what you think, he said, but he offered nothing else, no explanation, just turned and walked back into the house, leaving her standing alone on the porch as the storm finally broke overhead. She didn't understand it then. She wouldn't understand it until it was almost too late. If you've ever had someone pull away from you right when things felt right, drop your age and where you're watching from in the comments, because what happens next is going to break your heart before it heals it. She didn't see him again that night. She lay awake in the guest room, replaying the moment on the porch, the way his hand had felt against her jaw, the way his voice had cracked when he said her name, and then the sudden coldness that followed, like a door slamming on something that had barely begun to open. By morning, he was gone. Not gone as in avoiding her at breakfast. Gone as in the house felt hollow, the kind of empty that told her before Tae-ree's phone call confirmed it, that Sung-min had left before dawn, called back to the city for reasons nobody would explain. He said you'll be moved to a secure location, Tae-ree said over the phone, her voice carefully professional, for your safety. He couldn't tell me that himself, Chedinma asked, hurt sharpening into something colder. I'm sorry, Tae-ree said, and she did sound genuinely apologetic. There's been a development. He's dealing with family matters. Family matters? The phrase sat wrong in Chedinma's chest, foreboding in a way she couldn't quite name. What she didn't know, what Sung-min himself didn't know yet, was that the moment he'd almost kissed her on that porch, a phone call had already been placed from a number tied directly to his mother's private line. A conversation had already begun, quiet, ruthless, entirely outside his awareness. Sung-min's mother, a woman named Madam Yoon whose reputation in Korean business circles was spoken of in the same hushed tones reserved for natural disasters, had watched the viral photographs with an expression of controlled fury. She had built her son's image over decades, cold, untouchable, impossible to leverage. A foreign woman photographed clinging to him in public was not romance in her eyes. It was exposure, a crack in armor that had taken a lifetime to forge. Find her, she'd told her most trusted fixer, a man whose loyalty had been purchased long before Sung-min was old enough to understand what his family truly was. Make her disappear, quietly, before my son does something we'll all regret. Chidinma was moved that same afternoon, driven by unfamiliar men who introduced themselves as additional security, but whose eyes never quite met hers, whose conversation in the front seat dropped to whispers whenever she leaned forward to ask questions. She should have trusted her instincts sooner. By the time she realized something was wrong, the car had turned off the main road entirely, heading toward an industrial district she didn't recognize, warehouses looming gray and abandoned against an overcast sky. This isn't the way to the safe house, she said, voice tight. Nobody answered. I said this isn't the way, she repeated, reaching for the door handle only to find it locked, controlled from the front. Sit back, the driver said, voice flat. You'll be fine if you cooperate. Her heart slammed against her ribs, fear turning her mouth dry. She thought of Sung-min, of the way he'd pulled away from her on the porch, of the strange finality in his voice. Had he known? Had he sent her away on purpose? Into exactly this? No, she told herself, fighting panic. He wouldn't. He couldn't. The car stopped outside a warehouse with rusted metal doors, and rough hands pulled her out before she could fight back effectively, a cloth pressed over her mouth that smelled sharp and chemical, and the world tilted sideways into darkness. She woke sometime later, disoriented, wrists bound to a metal chair inside a cold, echoing space that smelled of rust and old oil. Dim light filtered through broken windows high above, and shadows moved at the edges of her vision, men she didn't recognize, speaking in low voices she couldn't fully understand. Where am I? She demanded, voice steadier than she felt. A man stepped into the light, older, sharp-featured, dressed too well for the setting, like a businessman who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. Somewhere your presence can be properly managed, he said, his English precise, accented, cold. Who sent you? He smiled, the expression entirely without warmth. Does it matter? You're a complication that needed removing. Nothing personal. If this is about Sung-min, she said, he's going to find out. He's going to come looking for me. Oh, I'm counting on it, the man said, something dark flickering behind his eyes. That riot you were caught in, the one that nearly cost him his life, that wasn't chance either. Planning takes months. Loyalty, unfortunately, doesn't always last that long, even within a family. Her blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying, he said, leaning closer, that the person who arranged the sniper that night, the person who wanted Sung-min dead in the chaos of a riot nobody could trace back to anyone, isn't some outside enemy. It's someone who shares his blood. Chidinma's mind reeled, the pieces of the last week rearranging themselves into a shape far more sinister than she'd imagined. Who? The man only smiled again, stepping back into the shadows. That's not my secret to give away. But I imagine he'll figure it out soon enough. The question is whether he figures it out before or after you're gone. If this twist just made your jaw drop, comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, because the truth is about to hit even harder than you expect. Sung-min discovered Chidinma was missing 3 hours after her disappearance, when Tairi, growing uneasy at the silence from the security detail assigned to transport her, tried repeatedly to reach the driver and received nothing but dead air. Track the vehicle, Sung-min said, voice deadly calm in the way that made even his most seasoned employees straighten with alarm. Now. The GPS led them to an abandoned lot on the outskirts of the industrial district. The car itself found empty, keys still in the ignition, no sign of struggle beyond a single dropped earring Chidinma had been wearing. Sung-min held it in his palm, and something inside him, something he'd spent years learning to suppress, cracked open entirely. Get me everyone assigned to her security detail today, he said. Every name, every background check. I want to know who authorized this route. It took less than an hour to trace the authorization back through layers of bureaucracy, designed specifically to obscure its origin, but Sung-min had grown up inside this machine. He knew where the bodies were buried, because he'd helped bury some of them himself. The trail led to his mother's private office. He stood outside her door for a long moment, the earring still clutched in his fist, before pushing it open without knocking. Madame Yoon looked up from her desk, unsurprised, as if she'd been expecting this confrontation since the moment she'd given the order. Where is she? Sung-min said, voice low, dangerous in a way his mother had never heard from him before. Somewhere. She can no longer damage this family's interests, Madame Yoon said, setting down her pen with deliberate calm. I did what needed to be done, Sung-min. You should thank me before you're too blinded to see clearly. Thank you, he repeated, disbelief coloring the words. You had a woman kidnapped, and you expect gratitude? I expect you to understand your responsibilities, she said, rising from her chair. You are not permitted the luxury of ordinary love. Every attachment you form becomes a weapon in someone else's hand. This company, this family, survives because we do not allow sentiment to compromise strategy. And the riot? He asked, something in his chest going cold. Was that strategy too? Something flickered across his mother's face, the first crack in her composure. I don't know what you're referring to. Someone arranged that riot months in advance, he said, stepping closer. Someone hired a sniper to take a shot at me in the chaos. Someone with access to information only this family would have. Was it you? I would never, she said, and for a moment he almost believed the horror in her voice was genuine. Sung-min, I love you. Everything I have done has been to protect you. Then who? He demanded. Because if it wasn't you, that means someone else in this family wanted me dead badly enough to plan it for months. And I need to know who, before they try again. His mother's silence stretched long enough to answer the question in ways words never could. Tell me, Sung-min said, voice breaking slightly despite his effort to hold it steady. Your cousin, she finally admitted, sitting back down heavily, like the weight of the confession had aged her 10 years in 10 seconds. Dae-hyun, he's convinced the board that you're too soft to lead the company through its next expansion. He believes removing you clears his path to control. Min felt the floor shift beneath him, betrayal settling into his bones like ice water. His own cousin, someone he'd grown up alongside, had orchestrated chaos that nearly ended his life, and in the aftermath, had likely been the one who told Chidinma's captors exactly where to find her once his mother's people lost track of her location. Where would he take her? Sungmin said, already moving toward the door. The old stadium complex, his mother called after him. The one scheduled for demolition next month. He's been using it as leverage in negotiations nobody was supposed to know about. Sungmin didn't respond. He was already running. He arrived at the stadium alone, against every protocol his training had ever taught him, security detail trailing far enough behind to give the illusion of solitude without actually leaving him exposed. The building loomed dark and hollow against the night sky. The same stadium, he realized with a sick twist in his stomach, close enough to where the riot had first erupted weeks earlier. Inside, emergency lighting cast long shadows across empty seats and crumbling concrete. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the structure, following instinct and the faint murmur of voices carrying from somewhere near what had once been the VIP boxes. He found Daehyun standing near a railing overlooking the empty field, hands clasped behind his back with the casual confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. "Cousin," Daehyun said without turning around, "I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out." "Where is she?" Sungmin said, every word controlled despite the fury coiling tight in his chest. "Safe, for now," Daehyun said, finally turning to face him, "though her continued safety depends entirely on how reasonable you're willing to be tonight." "What do you want?" "Your resignation," Daehyun said simply. "Full transfer of your shares in Hangard International. Walk away quietly, and the woman goes free unharmed. Refuse, and I'm afraid this whole building becomes rather unstable. Structurally, I mean. Demolition crews are already scheduled, after all. Accidents happen." "You'd kill her over a company," Sungmin said, disbelief and rage warring in his voice. "I'd remove an obstacle," Daehyun corrected. "Nothing personal, cousin. You understand that better than anyone. We were raised the same way. Remember? Sentiment is a liability." Sungmin's mind raced, calculating odds, exits, the location of whatever guards Daehyun had stationed nearby. But underneath the calculation was something rawer, something that had nothing to do with strategy at all. The thought of losing Chidma, of her paying the price for a war that had nothing to do with her, made every carefully constructed wall inside him crumble at once. "Take the company," he said quietly. "All of it. Just let her go." "Sungmin, don't," a voice called out. Hoarse, but unmistakably Chidinma's, from somewhere in the shadows behind Daehyun. Both men turned as she emerged, wrists still marked from restraints she'd apparently managed to work loose, expression fierce, despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "How did you?" Daehyun started, clearly caught off guard. "Your men underestimated how badly I wanted to survive," she said, chin lifted despite the tremor in her voice. "Sungmin, don't you dare give him anything, not for me." "Chidinma," he said, torn between relief at seeing her alive and terror at how exposed she was, standing unprotected in the open. "I mean it," she said, eyes locked on his. "I didn't survive that riot, and everything after, just so you could hand your whole life to someone who tried to have me killed. This isn't your sacrifice to make." Daehyun's expression darkened, reaching for something at his belt, but before he could move further, Chidinma moved first, faster than anyone expected, shoving hard against the railing beside him, with a strength born entirely of desperation and fury. The old metal, weakened by years of neglect and impending demolition, gave way beneath the sudden force. Daehyun's balance faltered, his weapon clattering uselessly to the concrete as he scrambled to catch himself against a support beam. In the chaos of the moment, Sungmin moved, closing the distance, subduing his cousin with the kind of controlled efficiency that came from years of training he'd hoped never to use against someone he'd once called family. Security arrived moments later, alerted by Taeri's insistence on following despite Sungmin's orders, and Dae-hyun was restrained before he could attempt anything further. It was over, the immediate danger at least, but as Sung-min turned to Chidinma, breathless and shaking but alive, whole, safe, he realized something had shifted permanently between them. She hadn't waited to be saved. She'd saved herself, and in doing so, had saved him too, refusing to let him surrender everything he'd built for her sake. "You could have died," he said, voice raw as he closed the distance between them, hands framing her face like he needed to confirm she was real. "So could you," she said, tears finally breaking free now that the danger had passed. "I wasn't going to let that happen, not when I finally understood what you actually mean to me." "Chidinma," he said, her name a prayer on his lips now. "I know why you pulled away," she said before he could speak further. "Tae-ri told me, on the way to wherever they were taking me before everything happened, about the danger, about your family, about why you thought pushing me away would keep me safe." "It didn't work," he said, something between a laugh and a sob catching in his throat. "No," she agreed, smiling through her tears. "It really didn't." He kissed her then, finally. No interruption, no sudden retreat, just the culmination of everything they'd been circling around since the moment she'd first grabbed him in the middle of chaos. It tasted like relief and terror, and something far more permanent than either of them had been willing to name before. If you're crying right now, you're definitely not alone, so drop a heart in the comments and let me know where you're watching from, because this story still has one more beautiful surprise waiting. The weeks that followed brought their own kind of chaos: legal proceedings against Dae-hyun, careful management of the public narrative, quiet conversations between Sung-min and his mother that began, slowly, to rebuild something resembling trust. Chidinma stayed close through all of it, no longer a stranger thrust into his world by accident, but someone who had chosen to remain even after learning exactly how dangerous that world could be. One evening, weeks after the stadium confrontation, as they sat together reviewing photographs Chidinma had finally recovered from backup files she hadn't realized existed, Sung-min went suspiciously quiet beside her. "What is it?" she asked, glancing up from her laptop. He didn't answer immediately, instead reaching into a drawer and pulling out a photograph, worn slightly at the edges, like it had been handled many times before. "Do you remember this?" he asked, sliding it across the table toward her. She picked it up, frowning slightly, and then her breath caught. It was a photograph she'd taken months before the riot, before any of this had begun, a candid shot of children playing football at a youth event she'd covered as a freelance assignment. In the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakable now that she knew what to look for, stood a man watching the children with an expression of quiet warmth she hadn't captured intentionally. "That's you," she said, staring at the photograph in disbelief. "How do you have this?" "I bought it," he admitted, something almost shy in his expression now, an emotion so unfamiliar on him that it made her chest ache. "From the event organizers, after I saw it posted online. I don't know why, I just knew I wanted it." "You were there," she said slowly, pieces clicking together. "Months before the riot, you saw me. I saw you talking to those children, like they mattered more than anything else in the world," he said. "I saw you laugh at something," one of them said, completely unaware anyone was watching. "I'd never seen anyone look so genuinely happy doing something so small." "And you never said anything," she said, wonder replacing disbelief now. "All this time, what would I have said?" he asked. "I was a stranger who'd noticed a photographer at a charity event. It wasn't until you grabbed me during the riot that I realized who you were, that the woman clinging to me for safety was the same woman I'd been unable to stop thinking about for months. So when I grabbed you," she said, voice trembling slightly, "you already knew me." "I recognized you immediately," he said. "You were never a complete stranger to me, Chidinma. Not really. Not from the moment I first saw you being kind to people who had nothing to offer you in return." She stared at him, this careful, controlled man, who had spent his entire life learning to suppress every soft thing inside him, admitting that he'd been quietly, secretly captivated by her long before fate had thrown them together in chaos. I love you, she said, the words slipping free before she could second-guess them, simple and true and entirely unafraid. I don't know when it happened exactly. Somewhere between the riot and the kitchen, and you burning rice 3 nights in a row. But I do. I love you too, he said, and the words sounded different coming from him than she imagined they ever had before. Unguarded, certain, like a man finally allowing himself to want something purely for its own sake, rather than its strategic value. I think I have, since long before either of us understood what that meant. 1 year later, the stadium buzzed with a different kind of energy, celebration without the shadow of violence, joy without the specter of danger lurking beneath the surface. Chidinma stood near the field's edge, camera in hand, capturing images for the travel and culture brand she'd finally built, the one that now had international recognition, sponsorships, a growing team of photographers who shared her passion for finding beauty in unexpected places. Sung Min found her there during a break in the festivities, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him in public, a small, private smile playing at his lips that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with her. A television host, covering the event's human interest angle, approached them with a microphone and an eager smile, having recognized the couple whose story had captivated headlines a year earlier. Everyone wants to know, the host said, grinning at the gathering crowd that had begun to notice them. How did you two actually meet? The rumors have been wild. The crowd laughed, phones raised, waiting. Chidinma smiled, glancing at Sung Min with warmth that needed no further explanation. I grabbed the first stranger I saw during a riot and told him not to leave me. The crowd laughed harder, charmed by her honesty. But Sung Min shook his head slowly, reaching into his jacket pocket. That's not entirely true. He pulled out the photograph, worn now from months of handling, and held it up for the crowd and the cameras to see, the candid image of him watching children play, captured by a woman who hadn't yet known she was being watched in return. I noticed her long before she noticed me, he said, voice carrying clearly despite the crowd's growing murmur. Months before that riot, I saw her being kind to strangers who had nothing to give her in return, and I never forgot it. Chidinma's eyes filled with tears, hand pressed to her mouth as she realized what was happening, the crowd around them falling into hushed anticipation. Sung Min lowered himself to one knee, right there on the field's edge, phones capturing every second as fireworks began preparing somewhere overhead for the evening's closing ceremony. I've spent my whole life being told that attachment makes a man vulnerable, he said, voice steady despite the emotion breaking through it. That love is a weakness I couldn't afford. But you taught me that the things worth protecting are exactly the things worth being vulnerable for. I've been looking for my forever without even realizing it. It turns out she found me first, in the middle of chaos, and never let go. He opened a small box, the ring inside catching the stadium lights. Marry me, he said simply. Let the whole world know exactly how we met, every ridiculous, terrifying, beautiful part of it. Chidinma laughed through her tears, nodding before she could even form the words, pulling him up into a kiss as the crowd erupted around them, fireworks finally bursting overhead in celebration that belonged entirely to the moment they'd both fought so hard to reach. If this story made you believe in love finding you in the most unexpected chaos, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories just like this one, because sometimes the person who saves you is the one you never even meant to grab in the first place.